Hey, what's up guys, it's Awesome Josh here, and today I'm going to be talking about how to beat PokéRogue Classic as a beginner. I'm going to go over the best Pokemon you should use, and also the tips and tricks that you should know throughout your run. And all these recommendations are going to keep in mind the fact that beginners don't really have a large access to the Pokemon in this game. So we're going to talk about Pokemon selections that are really accessible, or really easy to find in the wild in general. So basically we're going to keep the guide really beginner friendly. But yeah, before we begin, make sure to leave a like on the video. I don't usually do like goals, but if we do get to 1,000 likes, I'll do an endless guide for beginners as my next video. Okay, so right off the bat, if you're stuck, you should honestly just use Fuecoco. This Pokemon is probably like the best starter that you get from the beginning selection of Pokemon. Reason being is its signature move, Torch Song. Once it gets the Skeledirge, what does Torch Song do? Every time you use it, it'll pretty much just raise your special attack for free. And it's not even a chance thing, it's guaranteed to happen. So the second you use a Torch Song, your special attack will increase the next turn. Why is this good? Well, after you kill an enemy Pokemon and you move on to the next battle, whatever special attack raises you just got will remain on the field. This means that once you use Torch Song 6 times, you'll get the +6 special attack, and those buffs will pretty much stay with you until the game forces you to switch out, which is every 10 battles. Definitely one of the best starters to pick up and just makes the majority of the game so much easier. Alright, the next Pokemon to talk about is Venusaur, and the reason why Venusaur is on here is because of Leech Seed. Chip damage moves like Leech Seed, Soul Cure, Curse, you name it, they're all very important for chipping down Eternatus and eventually killing it. It also has some pretty good power for itself, right? It gains access to Giga Drain as an egg move if you so happen to hatch a Bulbasaur. It also gains access to like a bunch of strong moves like Leaf Storm, Petal Blizzard. So yeah, that's why Venusaur is on this list. The next Pokemon isn't exactly a starter that you start off with, however, it's really accessible and easy to find, so I would recommend just picking this thing up if you do find it. That would be Zigzagoon. The reason why Zigzagoon is on this list, even though it's such a weak Pokemon, is merely because of its ability Pickup. What Pickup does in this game is every time a battle ends, you will have a chance of picking up an item that the enemy Pokemon had. Whether that be some berries, some combat items, or maybe if you're lucky, even some lucky eggs, which are items that will increase your EXP gain. It might not seem significant at first, but you will later find out that this game is heavily reliant on the berry system, so having a berry like 80% of the time after a battle is just really good to have. Not to mention, you don't even need to have Zigzagoon on field. All it needs to be is on your party, and after the battle ends, it'll literally just pick up an item for free. Alright, the next set of Pokemon we're going to be talking about are not Pokemon that you're going to guaranteed have, but I would heavily recommend seeking them out because they will be very important for defeating difficult obstacles in this game. First thing we got to talk about is Rayquaza. Rayquaza is probably one of the biggest run enders of every classic run. Rayquaza's biggest weakness is Ice, because Flying and Dragon are both weak to Ice, so in order to counteract Rayquaza, we're going to need a strong Ice type. So with that in mind, I have two suggestions. The first one is Cetitan, and the reason why Cetitan is good is because A, it's really easy to find once you land into an ice biome, and B, this Pokemon gets access to some pretty decent stats and also gets Avalanche. So once it gets outsped by Rayquaza and it takes some damage, it can throw an Avalanche, which will be boosted to 120 BP and deal some pretty solid damage to that Rayquaza. But if for whatever reason you don't find a Cetitan in the wild, but you do end up finding a Bergmite or Avalugg, I would also recommend that because it's pretty much a similar strategy. Avalugg also gets access to Avalanche and it's also very slow, so all you need to do is just take a hit from Rayquaza and then throw an Avalanche back and it'll deal a solid amount of damage. These two Pokemon alone can definitely just two-shot Rayquaza so long as they can just get those moves off. So all you need to do is just make sure they're caught up in EXP, make sure they're not too behind in levels so that they can just 1v1 Rayquaza by themselves. Okay, now that we've talked about the Rayquaza counters, let's talk about ways to counter Eternatus, because obviously that's the main big bad of your run. This Pokemon that I'm about to suggest is honestly just, I think, one of the best ways to deal with Eternatus. However, I would understand if you don't find it, because it's not exactly like as easy to find in the wild as a Titan. But I don't think it's really that rare either, because I've been in a ghost biome a few times in classic runs, and from my memory, I've seen this thing in the wild like a handful of times. What is this Pokemon I'm talking about? It's Polteageist. Now, I've somewhat talked about Polteageist in a past video where you combine Mega Blastoise and Polteageist to create Mega Blaggeist. However, that relies on DNA splicers, and we mentioned earlier we're not going to talk about any strategies that rely on rare items. So we're just going to be talking about Polteageist, because Polteageist can actually pull off the strategy on their own. How this is going to work is you're going to basically give it berries, and if you already have the Linoone on your party like I suggested, then you'll be picking up a handful of berries every battle. Give all those berries to Polteageist, and then once it's facing Eternatus, you make it use Endure. The reason why it's going to use Endure is because it's going to live on 1 HP, and after it lives on 1 HP, it's going to collect all those berry buffs that you've just given it. And hopefully you find some turns where Eternatus doesn't target Polteageist, so you can get some Shell Smashes off as well. And once you're done spamming Shell Smashes and Endures, and you think you're finally ready to just unleash, you're going to be using your stored power, which is a psychic move, and obviously Psychic defeats Poison. Press that Sword Power, and hopefully that's enough to either 2-shot Eternatus or maybe 3-shot. So I do believe that this thing could deal with Eternatus really easily. All you need to do is just find it in the wild and also give it the proper moveset, and I think you'll be set. Okay, I know this is a guide for beginners, but for you veteran players that might be watching this video, I do have a crazy strategy for you in terms of beating Eternatus. So hear me out. So all you gotta do is bring a fairy type. It could be literally anything. It could be Floette, it can be a freaking Slurpuff, just any fairy type, okay? And then also bring a Heatran. I don't have Heatran myself, but if I did, I would use this strategy all the time. Heatran is a fire steel type that also gets flash fire. If you don't know what flash fire does, it essentially makes you immune to fire type attacks. So bring that fairy type and Heatran, and hopefully throughout your run you'll find a DNA splicers. So what I would do is I would splice that fairy Pokemon first and then splice Heatran second to keep its flash fire ability. And if you haven't picked up what I'm cooking here, a fairy steel type Pokemon is immune to Eternatus's dragon and poison type moves, and on top of that, when Eternatus throws its flamethrower, you're going to be immune to that as well thanks to flash fire. So yeah, for you veteran players out there, if you have access to a fairy type and also Heatran, and you also have a lot of shinies to stack up luck, I would heavily recommend just farming the strategy for just defeating Classic, because it's literally just a free way of beating Eternatus. Okay, we've talked a bunch about the Pokemon that you should use for Classic, but now it's time to go over some tips and also some tricks, and also maybe just some basic information on Classic mode. Every 10 floors, there is some kind of boss or gym leader, and then after that boss or gym leader is finished, you get a free Pokemon Center heal afterwards. I should also mention that when you're thrown into the Pokemon Center, it also retract your Pokemon, so any buffs that you might have, like for example +6 special attack on Skeleturge, those buffs will reset. The rival battles are at 8, 25, 55, 95, 145, and 195. And as I mentioned earlier, Rayquaza starts popping up at 145, and then it becomes Mega Rayquaza at 195. So make sure you have your really strong Ice type before floor 145. If you eventually get to 190, the Pokemon in floors 190 through 200 literally cannot be caught. So make sure you have your complete team before then. And finally, Eternatus is at floor 200. As I mentioned, make sure to bring chip damage like Leech Seed. If you find Soul Cure and Curse, those work really well as well. If you do find a wild Poltergeist, I would heavily recommend using it for Eternatus because it gets Endure, Shell Smash, you can abuse the berries, throw a stored power, and can probably deal with Eternatus in like 3 moves. But yeah, I think that's my basic rundown on how to beat PokéRogue Classic mode as a beginner. I've tried to keep all the recommendations and tips really beginner friendly, so it's something that almost everyone can use. But let me know down in the comments if you want some recommendations that are even more beginner friendly, just in case you don't have access to Titan or you don't end up finding Poltergeist. So if you want any other recommendations, then leave a question down in the comments and I'll probably answer them in like less than 10 minutes because I'm like that. But yeah, I think that wraps it up. Peace.